thought I'd wait a minute, see who might want to get up and preach if I don't. What do you think, Sue?
I think we should have a service where that's exactly what
If that's exactly what we do? All right. I'm not sure how that would go. You know, it's all right.
all the time.
Holy Spirit may lead somebody to come up here, have something to say. I'll set in the chairs. So there we go. All right. We continue in Genesis, and we're continuing in Genesis chapter 12, and the story of Abraham. And so it's interesting. So just to recap real quick. I put my notes in here? Yep. All right. So last week we talked about the call of Abraham and God's instruction to him to go, to leave and go. So the two things Abraham was called to do: leave his father's house, go to a land that God would show him. And then God had some promises to make. And it is interesting, as you look at the life of Abraham, you see that those promises take some time to be fulfilled. Okay? And so when you look at the New Testament references to Abraham, he's held up as a model of faith. All right? Now, so we're going to look at how Abraham responded to God's call. In what way is Abraham an example of faith for us today? I think sometimes when we tell Bible stories, we make a little bit of a mistake. And we say, these heroes of the faith always do things right. Okay? And I think particularly when I was growing up, you had flannel graph. You had this board, and you had these pictures, and the teacher would stick them on the board, okay? And flannel would hold them, they would stick to the flannel. And when you're teaching children, sometimes you don't want to get into some of the complexities of some of these people's lives, right? There's just stories you don't tell to 9-year-olds, right? The problem is, if you're still telling the story to 9-year-olds, and you told the 9-year-olds, and you're still telling it to 29 and 49 and 69-year-olds the same way, sometimes we miss, I think, the fullness of what the Bible wants us to see in these people, all right? So, God said, I will make your name great, have many descendants, and you, all the families of the earth, will be blessed. As we bless Abraham, God blesses us, and we bless ourselves. If we curse Abraham, we are cursed. So that was last week. Okay. So today, the story starts with Abraham going. All right. Now, in my life, there have been bumps in the road in my life of faith. Anybody else here have a few detours, maybe, side trips, bumps? As you're driving along, for me, when I'm driving, Lexi, that means when I'm holding my coffee, coffee goes everywhere, right? And I have to clean the car. And then my wife says, what did you do to your clothes, right? Because there's coffee stuff all over, right? And then I have to explain. And then we get into a conversation about what was I doing? Well, why was I holding the coffee mug this way? We do have no spill coffee mugs. I just had this conversation in the last week or 10 days about this, okay? So that kind of stuff, stuff happened. And so everybody knows you hit a bump in the road, right? Or swerved or something because there's coffee down the street. I remember one time I was going to visit a church, and this is back in the day when I still wore a tie. White shirt, tie. I haven't done that in a while, AJ. White shirt and tie. And I did that, Lexi, and coffee down my shirt. And I'm just getting ready to go preach. There's no way for me, I don't have time to go back and change. Everybody's going to see the coffee stain when I get up to preach. It happens, right? So we like to think of faith means you don't have any coffee stains on your shirt. But that's just not the way it is, right? There are coffee stains. Things need to be cleaned up. And there's bumps, all right? So we're going to see a couple of those today and are presented to themselves in the story of Abram. And so we're going to say, what does that mean as we think about faith? What does it mean to follow God in faith, and how Abraham sets the tone and pace for us? Okay? All right. So I just want to give you a warning. When you're driving down the road and see warning, A warning sign, curve ahead or something, deer or, cliff, don't fall off the cliff. And you see, what a warning sign is, it's not always a straight path or straight up to the vantage point where you get to see, right? Okay? All right, so let's go to Genesis 12, start with verse 4. All right. Start with verse 4 down to verse 20. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran, and he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken to his household in Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem, where he set up a camp beside the oak of Morah. At that time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your descendants. And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord, who had appeared to him. After that, Abram traveled south, set up camp in the hill country with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. There he built another altar and dedicated it to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord. Then Abram continued traveling south by stages toward the Negev. That's south. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarah, Look, you are a very beautiful woman. I don't think too many wives would object to that statement when their husband says, You are very beautiful. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, This is his wife, let's kill him. Then we can have her. So please tell them you are my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you. And sure enough, when Abram arrived in Egypt, everyone noticed Sarai's beauty. When the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to Pharaoh, their king, and Sarai was taken into his palace. Then Pharaoh gave Abram many gifts because of her: sheep, goats, cattle. She must have been very beautiful. Okay, she was not just a two-goat woman. Many, okay? Male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and accused him sharply. What have you done to me? He demanded. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister and allow me to take her as my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Please take her. Okay, here's your wife. Take her and get out of here. Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them. He sent Abram out of the country along with his wife and all his possessions. Okay. All right. So Abram is an example of faith, but there are some roadblocks. And we see two of them here. Okay? All right? So two of these were hinted at the end of chapter 11, when we started the story. Abram's father Terah leaves home, gets to Haran. The brother of Abram dies, leaves Lot. Lot's traveling with them. Okay? So when God makes this promise, he makes a promise to Abram, and he is already 75 years old. Okay? Even back then, people were having children before they were 75 years old. That's getting a little long in the tooth to be having children, right? Yes, okay? And especially you ladies, right? That's past when you normally are thinking about having children, right? So here's the thing. Here's a couple things we see in this person. When Abram gets this promise, he has a wife who has not been able to have children. She is barren. Now, we are talking about a culture, and there are still cultures today. They might say something like this, right? Now, ladies, I'm going to say something. I don't want you to take offense. Okay? I'm going to say it. But they might have said something like this. What good is she if she can't have children? Am I right? Right? If you can't have children, I'm gonna start looking around for another model, a newer model that might be able to have children. I'm just speaking the truth. That's the way some cultures, and there are many men who would think this way. Yeah, I see some heads nodding. Some of you are looking at me like, what? Right? I can't believe such a thing, right? But it's true. So Abram is here, getting his thing. He's hearing God say, I'm going to send you this land. You're going to make a great nation out of you. You're going to have many descendants. And he's looking at Sarai going, come on. I'm doing my part. Right? And when are you going to start having children? Hopefully he didn't say that. But he's thinking it. Okay? So, Sarah is one bump in the road. So the question, and anybody in the ancient world who hears the story, they're going to go, well, how's God going to do this? Right? So the question is raised. Here's the other one. Abram's brother has died, left a son. And in that culture, you would say, God has already provided. Here he is. Here's the ancestor. Here's the descendant. Here's the heir. It was very normal in a family like that you would take in the nephew and he would become the new heir. Right? Now, if those of us who are familiar with the Abram and Lot story, we see that we know, right? This was a problem. It didn't go well, Abram taking in Lot, okay? So we're going to talk about some of the detours that presented, some of the obstacles. But, wife who's not having children, brother who has passed and nephew is traveling with you, there are temptations, right? For an Abram to think, well, I will do this, okay? All right? So those two, there's a third one that comes up. There's four of them, 4 of these opportunities, okay? So we'll get to those. The 2 of them are right there at the beginning of the story, okay? So, with that in mind, they're in Canaan, and a famine comes. Now, I want you to notice, often tests of faith come in times of stress. Okay? So in this case, it's a famine. Crops. He's got notice the list of animals. He's got animals, people who depend on him. He can't feed them. So he goes to Egypt to get water and food. All right? And to provide for he's doing a good thing. But then when he gets to Egypt, what happens? He's got a beautiful wife. Okay, ladies, I'm just going to say something again. Just want to warn you. Hold on. Okay? Hold on to your seat. Okay? Here's what my Abram have been thinking nowadays. Okay? It says, hey, Pharaoh is going to see my beautiful wife. I can unload her on Pharaoh. And then I can get another wife that can have children. Now, it doesn't say that. I'm just reading between the lines a little bit. All right? But if you think it's possible, then maybe that thought might have come into his mind. So he says, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say that to Sarai. Okay, you can't have kids, so I'm just going to dump you on the Egyptians. He doesn't say that. But what he does say is, you are a very beautiful woman. Oh, you, right? And then when the Egyptians see you, they might invite you to stay. Okay? And then they do. They take her into the palace. Pharaoh says she is a beautiful woman, and the purchase price is very great. Many cows and sheep and goats and other things to buy. Sarah, we don't say it that way in America. But there are places in the world where there still is a negotiated purchase price. Am I right? Yeah? Yes? Okay. How many cows for my daughter? Okay. So that conversation happens. And so Abram, to kind of salve his conscience, she is like a cousin. I don't know. second or third removed. So technically she's part of the family, and he passes her off as his sister to Pharaoh. And then guess what happens? What happens then? Bad things happen to Pharaoh. God says, no, this is not the plan. Because of your disobedience, plagues and afflictions come upon the house of Pharaoh, and they say, we think this is a bad thing. We are having buyer's remorse, okay? And so we take this woman back to Abram, and he can keep, we don't even want the money, we don't want the cows back, just in case something might happen if we take the goats and the cows back. You keep it all, just leave. And he provides an escort to make sure Abram leaves the country, okay? So that's what goes on, all right? So Abram has a roadblock. He leaves, okay? Now the story continues. We don't have time for that, so that's what we see. Abram tries to protect himself, okay? So the first thing I want you to know, Abram tries to protect himself. He does not trust God to keep his promise. Or at least the question is raised. Will Abram trust God to keep the promise? Or does Abram have to, make it happen himself? Right? So as you're a reader or listener to this story, those are the questions that are raised at this point. Because Sarah has not had a child. Abram has made the promise, but there's no heir, there's no descendant. How's this going to happen? And Abram is asking the same question. We are asking, how's God going to do this? Now, some of us have read the story before. We know the end, right? Okay, so that's a vantage point. But I also, it's important for us, those of us who have been in the church, read the Bible before, we know the story goes. I don't want you to miss what happens here, okay? So, because sometimes we just say, Abram, example of faith, father of faith, an example for us to follow, and then we miss some of these detours that Abram takes, okay? So we see the first one here in this chapter, right? So I'm just for the sake of time, we're just going to mention some of these, okay? So in chapter 15, right, God confirms him, God shows up, and he visits Abram, appears to him. One of the little things I want to detail, so first God spoke to Abram, and at the end of chapter 12, and in chapter 15, it says he appeared to Abram. So it sounds like that there is a progression of revelation to Abram that God speaks, and we don't really know exactly how that happened, but in this case, God appears, okay? And in the Genesis account, there's a couple of times this could have been a vision. This could have been sometimes like an angelic. There are a couple places where it tells a story that two men come to Abram's tent, and he recognizes that it's the Lord in the presence of, visibly showing up, looking like two guys. Okay, so he entertains them, welcomes them, shows hospitality. So when it says he appeared, we don't really, it could be a personal visitation in the form of a man, it could be in a vision or a dream. Okay, we don't know, but it's more than just words. There's a physical kind of appearance that God is. So God is trying to remind Abram, he is serious about this promise, and he's inviting Abram to trust him. Okay? So, as he goes on, so in Genesis chapter 15, a couple of things happen to give some clarity, all right, to this promise. In one case, God has a conversation. Are you ever tempted to bargain with God? Say, well, God, you said you will do this, but it's not happening yet. How can we confirm the deal? All right, we got to confirm the deal. How are we going to have this promise happen? All right, and so in this case, Abram says, "Look, my servant Eleazar, he has been faithful. He's done his job. Could he be my heir? I like him. Could we just designate Eleazar?" And God said, "No, not Eleazar. It will be your son." Okay? So in chapter 15, he confirms more details. Evidently, Abram didn't get that message because Lot is not his son. Eleazar is not his son. But Abram is concerned because Sarai has not had children, right? It doesn't look promising for me to have a son, okay? So, have you ever been there where you felt God was leading you in a certain direction and giving you a promise or a purpose in your life, and you're saying, I don't see it, okay? Now, I want to ask you a question about faith here, okay? What if God made promises and immediately answered? What would we be like? Right? Would we learn how to trust God? So sometimes, probably most of the time, God makes a promise. And He expects us to follow and live into that promise and trust Him to provide. Okay? And I have heard many stories. For example, there might be a woman married to a man who does not honor God. And she's been praying. God, I'm praying for my husband, William, all right? And I'd like for him to start going to church, to read the Bible, and follow Jesus. That's my request. I want that to happen. But guess what? She prays for a year, another year, another year. Next thing is 10 years, 20 years. Sometimes it's 30 years or more, right, before that happens. Okay? There are a lot of testimonies like that, where somebody is being prayed for by family members or friends, and it may take decades before they open up their heart and their mind to God. So the question is, God is inviting us to walk with Him in His purpose in this world. He wants to know, are you just in it for this week? And if it doesn't happen this week, you're quitting? Or are you in it for the long haul? That's the question, right? Are we in it for the long haul? In this case, it's 25 years for Abraham and Sarah have a child. 25 years of living and waiting and praying before they have a child. And guess what happens in that 25 years? There's plenty of opportunities for doubt. There's plenty of opportunities for distraction. So sometimes we are in that position, right? AJ, where we're waiting on God to do something, and we think, wait a minute, God, I told you I would be obedient to you. I volunteered, and I served. I put money in the offering plate. Okay? I said no to these 5 things. Now, why haven't you? Come on, where's your part of the deal, right? Sometimes we think that way about something God's promised us. Okay? So, Abram needs to learn how to trust God. So I think that's one of the examples for us. God makes a promise. He has His own time frame. And we need to listen and look and watch for Him to lead us into obedience and His provision. Okay? So, let me give you an example here at the campus house about this. So, I forget exactly. What year is this? This is 2024. So, 8 years ago, we started talking about someone to take my place here. Because the board looked at me and they said, he is not getting any younger. At some point, they're going to need another campus minister. Right? Yes, that's true. Okay. And so, yeah, 2016, 2015, we started talking about that. Start making plans. Start putting money aside so that we can pay for the new one. And it wasn't until 2022 that we found Caleb and hired him. Okay? And it's going to be another 2 years, I think, before the final handoff takes place. Okay? Now, I think that is important. This ministry started in the early 1960s. Okay? There have been 3 campus ministers in our history. 3 of us. There's been other staff, but 3 senior campus leaders. I'm the 3rd one. Caleb will be the 4th. Now, I think that is remarkable provision. God has given us leaders who have served for a long time, board members, staff, and I think this choice is important. Who is going to be the next campus minister? So I'm not in a hurry, right? I'm not in a hurry. I want to make sure, is this the one God has led to us? Okay? And so it might take some time. I might still be here when I'm 70. Walker? What do you think? Okay? I don't know. All right? Now, no, I'm just kidding. That's not going to happen. So, but Caleb's on track. He's on pace, but it's taking time. Right? We could have been distracted. We could have gotten in a hurry. We could have said, well, God, you're taking too long to send us the guy we want. You're taking too long to give us the money we need. We're going to take a shortcut. You ever? Yeah, take a shortcut. And I'm going to hurry this along. So the example of Abram is you need to listen to God. You need to watch for distractions. Avoid them. And we need to focus on his provision and learn to wait. Now that doesn't mean there's not things to do while you're waiting for God to fulfill that promise. Okay? Abraham was still a faithful worshiper. What is it we see here? He comes into the land of Canaan, he builds altars, and he worships God. So that means he's living as a faithful worshiper of God, and people can see that in his life. So there's a testimony there. There's a witness to who is providing for Abram and who he stands for. Okay, so that is going on. He's got a family and all kinds of things to take care of, right? So that happens. So Eleazar is presenting God. What about? You said you wanted to do this. What about this? God says no. It's going to be a son. All right. Then in chapter 16, we see another one, okay? We are living today with the results of this action that happens in chapter 16, right? And in chapter 16, Abram has offered Lot. Abram has offered Eleazar. He's tried to toss Sarai under the bus. None of those were not received well. So Sarai says, well, since it's evidently all on me, and I have not had a child, guess what? Abram, why don't you take my handmaid and have relations with her? She will have a child, and she will be the heir. Okay? Now, if I were writing the story, I would have said, well, Abram has learned his lesson by now, and he says no to that opportunity. But if you've read the Bible, you know that Abram doesn't say no to Hagar and says, well, sure, I'll take that, okay? And he goes, sleeps with her, she gets pregnant, and Ishmael is born. Okay, and God says no. And there has been enmity and hostility between the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac since that time. And you read the newspaper today and you'll see the evidence of it. Okay? Now, God still provided, and Jesus came to us through the line of Isaac, but there was a blessing to Ishmael because he was a descendant of Abraham, and consequences have come down to us on both sides of that through history, because Sarah and Abram colluded in not being obedient. All right, so that happens, chapter 16. Then God visits again in chapter 18, visits Sarah this time, and says, a year from now, you will have a son. Okay, now, by this time, she's in her 90s. What? I'm going to have a child in my 90s? And what do we know scientifically about women and their ability to have children? You guys know this. I'm not going to be spoiling anything, right? You guys ladies know this, right? That there's a window, right? When it's good to have children, and then after a certain age, problems can occur, right? Okay? And so most ladies do not, right? I'm going to pick on you. You do not want to be having children in your 90s, right? No, right? So you might be saying, that is not a fulfillment of the promise, God, of me having a baby when I'm 95, right? You might have some conversation. So, in our family, we have had 4 children. Some of you know number 4, Jaren. Okay, he was here last year. Right? So when Jaren was born, or conceived, and Lynn realized she was pregnant, she told me, I had some long talks with God, because I thought I just would have 3. And now there's number 4. Okay, what are you doing? Okay, why did you do this? Okay, well, there may have been some other conversations that God had with her about all of that, right? But, right, she was thinking, I thought I was done, and now you brought us another one. Okay? So I can't imagine what Sarah's thinking. So we do know one thing what the Bible says is she did. When God comes to her and says, a year from now, you're going to have this baby, what does she do? She laughed. Are you crazy? And she might not have said that, but she did laugh. Because she thought there's no way. Right? And then guess what happens? She does. She has a child. Right? His name is Isaac. That story is told in chapter 21. Now, something else happens before that, and we're about to wrap up. Okay. I just want to give you a high view of how this progresses. Okay? So in chapter 21, Isaac is born. God fulfills the promise, but it took 25 years for this to happen. All right? And in the in-between, there are lots of roadblocks and detours. In chapter 19, we have the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? Now, in our culture today, when we read this story, we get distracted. We miss the main point of the story, I think. Okay? We get distracted by the sexual overtones of this story. But the main point of the story is Lot is a problem and a distraction for Abram's obedience to God's purpose, and has continued to be so. Okay. The Lot option is not a good path for Abram when it comes to the fulfillment of God's promise. Okay? So we see that very visibly depicted in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot's family and his daughters and all that goes on. Okay? We don't have time to go into all that, but so we see that, all right? So we see all these detours. We see all these distractions before there's fulfillment. Now, in a couple of weeks, after fall break, I think Caleb preaches a sermon, then I preach, and then we're going to come back to the story, and I'm just going to give you a hint, all right? God says to Abram, for all this time, all these distractions, Isaac is born, fulfillment, he's the child of promise, okay? Now I want you to take him up to the mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. Yikes. What do you do with that? I'm not going to tell you today. All right? So I'd like for you to come back and hear that message in a few weeks, in October. All right? Can you imagine, ladies, you've had a child you've been waiting for decades, fulfillment of God's promise, he's the special one God promised, and then your husband's packing him up to go up on the mountain, and he's going to be the sacrifice? You might ask some questions, Megan, right? I would think so. I would be shocked if you didn't, all right? You might ask questions. And Abram might be having a conversation with God as they're walking up that hill, right? All right, now, the Bible says Abram believed God and was credited him as righteousness. That's in chapter 15. Paul quotes that as an example to us. So we need to study the life of Abram and learn what it means to have faith and trust God. All right. So I just want to, right now, we're going to pause in this story where we are, okay? And here's a couple things I just want to say to wrap up. Is we have to listen closely and trust God. We have to resist temptation to do it ourselves. Okay? God has made a promise, and we are tempted to take shortcuts. We are tempted to try to do this by our own power. Okay? Whatever that promise is, okay? We have to learn through the passage of time to trust God's promise. If God has promised us something, do we trust Him? Okay? So that's the question I'm raising for you today. And all of us have been made promises by God. And all of us, in various ways and in various times, have been tempted to take shortcuts and to try and do it ourselves. Okay? And what I'm just saying to you is, don't. Resist the shortcut. Take the time, wait on God, and listen to His. Now that's easier, I'm old, it's easier said than done. I don't know what the 25-year-old Mark Pike would have said about what the 65-year-old Mark Pike is saying to me. But that's what I'm saying today. Learn from the example of Abraham. And watch for God's promise and fulfillment and provision, and also watch for the distractions and the road bumps, and try and keep your eyes so you don't go into that ditch. Okay? Because it will happen. The famine will come. The beautiful Hagar will be offered to you, right? Pharaoh will say, take all this stuff, I'll take your wife. Those options. Now, obviously, there's not a Pharaoh. I'm being metaphorical here, right? But somebody may say to you, the job you want, that God said you will do this, but what if you do this? And you can make a lot more money doing this, but what if it somehow detours you from what God is calling you to do? That takes discernment to know when to say yes to what God's promised and no to what might look a lot better. Right? We all are faced with those choices. Okay? Let me give you one more story, and then we'll close. So this is the last story, worship leading people. So we are about ready, right? Reagan and Samantha, you guys are about to come up here. You lead us in worship. Get ready for communion. So I promise this is it. Okay? When I went to Great Lakes Christian College, way back in the previous century. And I thought I was going to be a youth pastor. And I did a youth ministry internship, and I learned, no. It was lunch and junior high that convinced me that I was not cut for being a youth pastor, all right? I will be in jail, okay? Because I just can't be around middle school kids for a career. I just can't do it, all right? Sorry, all right? But I ended up getting a calling to be doing this. You guys are a lot better, in my view, than hanging out with this kids. They're good people, and I've raised for them, right? So, you know, but for my job, I don't think I could have done it, okay? So I graduated from college. Well, I don't think I want to be a youth minister. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, all right? So I decided to wait and listen. That was good. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I decided to go to seminary, go to grad school. And at the same time I made that decision, or was making that decision, my home church in Michigan came to me and said, why don't you be the youth minister at our church? You just graduated from college. Isn't that why you went? But I knew in my heart I should not do that. Okay? So I chose to go to seminary. And the preacher's wife and my dad both came to me and cautioned me about the path I was taking. They said, now, they did it with good intention. Okay, I don't want you to think that I am unhappy with them or I think they were bad people. But I particularly remember the preacher's wife saying to me, don't become so heavenly minded you're no earthly good. You ever heard something like that? Right? But I knew that I should not do this. And I chose to go to seminary. It was at seminary I learned about this opportunity Because of that, I ended up here. Okay? But fortunately, I think God was just watching out for me, because I'm not sure I was terribly, terribly smart at age 22, right? I was where some of you guys are sitting right now, 20, 21, 22. Fortunately, I was thinking and praying. God said, go do this, all right? And I did that, and I ended up here. At our retreat, one of our students asked me what's the hardest thing about being a pastor? I said to her, I don't know. I think it's been pretty good. I think it's been pretty good here. So I called my wife yesterday while we were at the retreat. And I said, so-and-so asked me this question. And what do you think? Because, it's always good to ask your wife, okay, about things like that, right? She might have a different view, all right? And I said, here's what I was asked, here's what I said. And Psalm 16 came to my mind. And it says, the lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. So that's what was going through my head. And guess what she said on the other end of the phone? Psalm 16, the lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. I said, that's what I was thinking. And she said, well, we read the same book. Okay. Now, I'm saying that it's not that there haven't been hurdles or bumps or challenging times. There have been. Okay. But what I can say to you is God will provide. If you follow his purpose and call, and he has made that clear to you, he will provide. Okay? So you gotta listen, watch the example of Abram, live by faith and trust God, and he will provide. Okay? That doesn't mean there won't be famines along the way. There will be. Okay? Alright, now you may come up, lead us in a song, and we will have communion. Alright? Yes, now you are welcome.